Welcome, everyone. This is Nichelle Gray with Action on Smoking and Health. We're going to get started. We are also broadcasting live on YouTube. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our presenters, uh, Carol Mcgruder first.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Carol Mcgruder, and I am the proud co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. Formed in 2008, the AATCLC is composed of a cadre of dedicated community activists, academics, public health advocates, and researchers. Though based in California, we have partnered with community stakeholders, elected officials, and public health agencies across the country and around the world. Our mission is to save the 45,000 Black lives lost each year from tobacco-induced diseases in the United States of America. We have resolutely pursued that mission since our inception. We stand before you today to announce that we are suing the United States Food and Drug Administration for their failure to enact public health policy that protects the health and welfare of African Americans. Standing with us and joining us as a co-plaintiff in this lawsuit are our colleagues from ASH, the Action on Smoking and Health. In 2009, President Barack Hussein Obama signed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. The Tobacco Control Act gave the FDA the authority to regulate the manufacture, distribution, and marketing of tobacco products. When the Tobacco Control Act was signed, all characterizing flavors were banned from cigarettes, all except menthol. Menthol was inexplicably given a pass. Characterizing flavors are the foundational building block to nicotine addiction. As we witnessed last year with the teen vaping epidemic, flavors seduce children and nicotine hooks them. The exclusion of menthol from the original Tobacco Control Act prompted former U.S. Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, the Honorable Joseph T. Califano, to say that exempting menthol was like relegating Black children to the back of the bus. We have been waiting over 10 years for Black children to be allowed on that bus, waiting over 10 years for them to be protected. Black people are not born with a Newport or a Swisher Sweets in their mouths. The tobacco industry's pernicious, persistent racial targeting of our community does that. As documented in the film Black Lungs, Black Lives, most major tobacco companies such as Lorillard and Reynolds American Incorporated, known as RAI, preyed on the Black community, some even giving away tobacco products to Black children as young as 9 years old. These tobacco companies are, in fact, federally adjudicated racketeers under the Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act. The cycle of multi-generational addiction in the Black community must be broken. Since 2009, the AATCLC has worked tirelessly to write the original omission of menthol from the FDA's characterizing flavors list. We have gathered petitions, written resolutions, educated, engaged our community and fellow public health colleagues. We have provided public testimony, submitted FDA commissioned research papers, all imploring the FDA to exercise its authority and remove mentholated tobacco products from the marketplace, just as it had originally done for all other flavored cigarettes. In 2014, the Honorable Joseph T. Califano and Dr. Lewis Sullivan, then serving as chairman and vice chair of the Citizens Commission to Protect the Truth, a group composed of all living United States Secretaries of Health, Education, and Welfare, all living U.S. Secretaries of Health and Human Services, all living U.S. Surgeon Generals, and the directors of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. All of them signed on from every administration, Republican and Democrat, at that time since President Lyndon B. Johnson, and demanded that tobacco companies stop marketing and selling mentholated cigarettes. They demanded that they stop exploiting children and African Americans. In 2016, the great city of Chicago enacted the first ordinance that restricted the sale of mentholated tobacco products around schools. Since then, municipalities across the nation have taken up this issue, including the city of San Francisco, which under the leadership of Pollock Cohen, an African-American county supervisor, had the first citywide ban of these products in a city. Our own national leadership organizations, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, have passed national resolutions, either calling for the FDA to act or for Black communities to support local legislative actions to restrict these deadly products. But Black people should not have to muster our communal resources and attention to do what the FDA has been mandated to do, protect the health of Black people. Here we are in 2020, and even as African-American smokers and their families continue to languish from cancer, heart attacks, strokes, high rates of asthma, and sudden infant death syndrome, the tobacco control and prevention needs of our community continues to take a back seat. As the unfortunate present-day current events attest, our communities continue to be besieged by the more immediate problems of police violence, racism, unemployment, and the continued inequities on all fronts. In the arena of public health, much attention and efforts are centered around the social determinants of health. But as Dr. Daniel E. Dawes, director of the Satcher Health Leadership Institute at Morehouse School of Medicine, so brilliantly lays out in his book, The Political Determinants of Health, it is the political determinants that are the drivers for the social determinants. If we are ever to enjoy an equal opportunity to have healthy and thriving communities, then our political and public health institutions must tackle the structural institutional inequities that allow unequitable health policies to exist. And with that, I'm going to pass our next speaker, who is our attorney, Christopher Liang. He's with Pollock Cohen. And we want to say that we thank God for them in helping us to bring this action to court and to get justice for our communities. Christopher.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christopher Liang. As Carol mentioned, I'm a partner at Pollock Cohen, a law firm that specializes in public interest litigation. I want to thank everyone again for coming out here today. Our firm represents the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council, as well as Action on Smoking on Health. Today, we filed an important case that we hope will save tens of thousands of lives, and which is aimed at addressing a terrible wrong that has been perpetrated against the Black community. Over 10 years ago, Congress directed the FDA and Department of Health to quickly address the harms caused by menthol cigarettes. In that time, however, the FDA and department have done nothing. Our lawsuit seeks to compel these agencies to do what Congress directed them to do over 10 years ago. That is to quickly address the harms caused by menthol cigarettes. As alleged by our complaint, when Congress passed the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act in 2009, Congress was particularly concerned with the tobacco companies' targeting of African Americans, the high rates of menthol cigarettes used by African American youth, and the higher rates of lung cancer found among African American smokers. Congress then directed the FDA and Department of Health to move quickly to address these critical public health issues and to consider whether menthol cigarettes should be banned. Since that time, however, FDA has simply ignored Congress's directive and failed to act on the growing body of scientific evidence concerning the devastating harms caused by menthol cigarettes. In 2011, FDA's advisory panel surveyed the scientific literature and concluded that removing menthol cigarettes from the marketplace would benefit the public health. That same panel found that if menthol cigarettes had been removed from the market in 2010, then by 2020, which is today, roughly 17,000 deaths would have been avoided and over 2 million people would not have started smoking. For Black Americans, that would mean nearly 5,000 deaths avoided and almost 500,000 smokers that never would have started smoking. In 2013, FDA's own study of the scientific literature found that menthol cigarettes were more addictive and more dangerous than regular tobacco-flavored cigarettes, that tobacco companies tailored their menthol marketing strategies and messages toward African Americans, and that as a result of Big Tobacco's marketing efforts, menthol cigarettes were disproportionately used by African American smokers. But FDA, instead of acting on this knowledge or acting to address these harms, the FDA did nothing. And as a result of their inaction, our nation's menthol cigarette health crisis has only grown. In 2009, when the Tobacco Control Act was enacted, menthol cigarettes represented just over 25% of all cigarettes smoked in the United States. Today, that figure has increased to 36%. In 2009, more than 12 million smokers used menthol cigarettes. Today, over 19 million smokers use menthol cigarettes. In 2009, nearly 70% of African Americans who smoked used menthol cigarettes, and today that figure has risen to over 85%. In sum, FDA's inaction on menthol cigarettes has harmed the public health, and as alleged in our complaint, is unlawful. FDA's sole mission is to protect the public health, apply the best science, and to timely act in the best interests of the people that it serves. FDA's continued inaction on menthol cigarettes lacks any reasoned justification, and the coronavirus pandemic has only highlighted the urgency of these issues. As we know, and as FDA is well aware, the coronavirus is particularly deadly to people suffering from a tobacco-related illness, such as diabetes, heart disease, and lung disease, illnesses that for years have disproportionately affected African Americans. Thus, we hope that through this action, the FDA and Department of Health will now address these important issues and take affirmative steps to fulfill the promise of health equity for all Americans. I'll pass it back to you, Carol.
Thank you, Chris. Our next presenter is our partner organization, and we are grateful that you are stepping up with us and standing with us, Ash. We're going to have Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, who's with the Action on Smoking or Health.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, and I'm the managing attorney at Action on Smoking and Health. Action on Smoking and Health, ASH, was founded in 1967 and is America's oldest anti-tobacco organization. We're dedicated to a world with zero tobacco deaths. Because tobacco is the leading cause of preventable death worldwide, ASH supports bold solutions proportionate to the magnitude of the problem. The case we're announcing today is a perfect example of that type of action. Menthol cigarettes have killed thousands of people in the time that the FDA has delayed. The committee's own report concluded that if menthol cigarettes were removed from the marketplace in 2010, then by 2020, this year, roughly 17,000 premature deaths would have been avoided, and about 2.3 million people would not have started smoking. And by 2050, the cumulative gains would have resulted in over 300,000 premature deaths avoided and over 9 million people that would not have started smoking. The US government is failing to protect its citizens, particularly African Americans, from the devastating harms of menthol, and the US is also falling behind the global trend. As one example, the US has failed to ratify the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the FCTC, which is the International Tobacco Treaty. It's an evidence-based treaty that reaffirms the right of all people to the highest standard of health. It was one of the fastest ratified treaties in UN history, and today 181 countries around the world are party to that treaty, which covers over 90% of the world's population, with the US as one notable exception. The guidelines for Article 9 and 10 of the treaty encourage countries to begin prohibiting or restricting ingredients which may be used to increase palatability in tobacco products. That includes menthol. And many countries around the world are doing just that. Canada's province of Nova Scotia in 2015 became the world's first jurisdiction to ban the sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol. 4 other Canadian provinces have since followed suit. Ethiopia and Uganda in 2015 and 2017 banned flavored tobacco products, including menthol. Menthol cigarettes are now also banned in the 28 countries of the European Union, as well as in Turkey and Moldova as of May 2020. The tobacco industry works hard to oppose flavor and menthol bans. For example, Brazil announced a ban on all flavoring in 2012, but it hasn't become a law yet because of legal challenges from the industry. A leaked Philip Morris International PMI document from 2014 indicated that it opposed flavor bans and identified the European menthol ban as a threat to its business. It is better for their business to keep people addicted and dying. The United States used to be a leader in tobacco control, and now we're falling behind at the cost of thousands of lives. At Action on Smoking and Health, we're proud to be part of this case. The FDA needs to take action on menthol to protect Americans and their right to health. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Our next speaker will be 6 the Poet. She is here to put a face on the 45,000 Black people that we lose every year in this country. We have been saying the names of people that we lose, and so she is here to put a face on the 45,000 names people that we lose every year. 6
Hi, my name is 6 the Poet. I'm a spoken word artist from Oakland, California. I speak on topics that no one wants to address, and I use my platform to uplift and encourage others. I'm here to talk to you about my mother. She was the strongest, hardworking woman that I would ever know. Her name is Wanda Westbrook, and she passed away from being a chain smoker. It has affected my family in so many different ways by a death that could have been prevented. My children won't be able to grow up with a grandmother. I won't be able to share these stories, these memories, and the love that my mother has given me. My kids will not get a chance to experience due to her being a chain smoker. Menthol has taken a lot from me and my family, and this could have easily been prevented had she known the causes of being a chain smoker or smoking or picking one cigarette up. My family will never be the same. Thank you.
Thank you, 6 Next up, we have Dr. Valerie Yerger. She's a professor in health policy, and she's one of the co-founding members of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council.
Good. Thank you, Carol. Are the driving forces in the continued health disparities faced by the many marginalized sectors of our society. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that tobacco-related diseases kill 45,000 Black Americans every year. That's more than AIDS, car accidents, suicides, and murders combined. And this all means that 45,000 of our Black family members who walk amongst us now will be dead next year. Even years before the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act became law, there have been public health and tobacco control advocates meeting behind the scenes with the tobacco industry, making deals. When one of my colleagues brought to my attention that menthol as a bargaining chip would be excluded from the list of banned flavor additives, I called William Robinson, then executive director of the National African American Tobacco Prevention Network. This call led to a conversation with then Congresswoman Donna Christensen, which then led to the amended Tobacco Control Act of 2009, backed by the Congressional Black Caucus and signed into law by President Barack Obama. The amendment placed the highest priority on studying the impact of the use of menthol in cigarettes on the public health, including such use among African Americans, Hispanics, and other racial and ethnic minorities. In the meantime, the FDA acted quickly to ban the use of other flavored additives in cigarettes. Those of us who were skeptical of this ban tried to get everyone to understand that the banned flavors made up only about 0.2% of the US cigarette market, whereas menthol flavored cigarettes accounted for then 30% of that market. And as we heard earlier, it is now up to 36% of that market. Also at the same time, tobacco company executives were covering up the truth about the sensory effects of menthol by publicly stating that menthol is only an ingredient in their company's taste recipes. Tobacco documents research conducted by me and my team at the University of California at San Francisco showed that according to tobacco companies' in-house studies, menthol effectively boosted their sales by making cigarettes more palatable to first-time smokers because menthol covers up the unpleasant taste and harshness of inhaled tobacco smoke, while adding a fresh, minty flavor and cooling effect. Hence, another cover-up. Menthol also has complicated pharmacological interactions with nicotine, such as soothing nicotine's irritating effects. Menthol keeps smokers exposed to the addictive power of nicotine by making cigarettes easier to take up, easier to smoke, and harder to quit. Menthol is a social injustice. According to some of my tobacco documents research, the targeted marketing of menthol cigarettes, the pervasive presence of the tobacco industry, and the aggressive menthol wars all occurred in Black urban communities. To make matters even worse, some of our Black leadership groups have been co-opted by the tobacco industry. In exchange for money or sponsorships, they either diffuse tobacco control efforts or act as front groups to assure the policies benefit the tobacco industry. We need these so-called leaders to understand their relationships with the tobacco industry have hidden costs. The Black community is under siege, sometimes by its own leaders. COVID-19 pulled open the curtains, covering the health, economic, and social disparities disproportionately affecting Black Americans. The Black Lives Matter movement, which has expanded because of the murder of George Floyd, burned those curtains down. There are no more curtains to cover up the injustices affecting Black Americans. Many of us here before you have been trying to expose these tobacco industry cover-ups for years. After more than a decade of the FDA not acting to place menthol on its list of banned flavors, one is forced to ask, are we talking about incompetence, inhumane compromise, or malintention, or all three? In its evaluation of menthol cigarettes, the FDA reported that there is adequate data to suggest that, and I quote, menthol use is likely associated with increased smoking initiation, greater addiction, and that menthol smokers are less likely to successfully quit smoking. These findings make it likely that menthol cigarettes pose a public health risk above that seen with non-menthol cigarettes. End of quote. FDA, no more cover-ups. Add menthol to your list of banned flavor additives. Thank you for hearing me. Carol, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yerger. Our last speaker, before we take questions from the audience, is Dr. Philip Gardner. Dr. Gardner is a doctor of public health, and he is also a co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning to all and good afternoon to all, coast to coast. Before we close this press conference, let's not forget that 2 days from now will be the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth. The day, June 19th, 1865, slaves in Texas finally heard the news that they had been freed. Juneteenth has become a day of celebration in the Black community, acknowledging all the sacrifices and struggles that it took to free African Americans from slavery. But as the last 155 years have shown, we are still a long way from that freedom. I stand before you today to reaffirm that the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council is committed to saving Black lives. Let's be clear, and it's worth repeating, that the main killer of Black folks are tobacco-related diseases, including heart disease, stroke, and lung cancer, to name a few. The main vector of death and disease into our community are menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars. These products have been mercilessly pushed down our throats by the predatory marketing of the tobacco industry for the past 60 years. The FDA has the ability to stop this right now. We already know that menthol makes the poison go down easier. Menthol masks the harsh taste of burning tobacco. Menthol's cooling and anesthetic property allows for deeper inhalation. The deeper you inhale, the more toxins and nicotine you take in. The more toxins and nicotine you take in, the more addicted you become. Numerous studies have shown that it's harder to quit menthol cigarettes than non-menthol cigarettes. And as if to add insult to injury, folks with COPD produce receptors in their lungs that attract the coronavirus, and we know that Black folks have disproportionately high rates of COPD. Frankly, the FDA Center for Tobacco Products should be ashamed of themselves for not dealing with this issue long ago. Literally hundreds of thousands of Black lives could have been saved. Now is the time for the Senate to step up and pass the Pollock bill that would outlaw the manufacture and sale of menthol products. Now is the time for other states to follow the lead of Massachusetts and prohibit the sale of these products statewide. Now is the time for cities and counties around the country to follow the lead of San Francisco and prohibit the sale of menthol cigarettes and flavored little cigars citywide. And yes, now is the time for the FDA to step up to the plate and do what it was supposed to do years ago, prohibit the sale of all flavored tobacco products. The AATCLC is aware that the fight to remove menthol and flavored tobacco products are part of a larger fight for a healthier America and a more racially just America. The disproportionate impact of COVID-19 in the Black community just exposes the fundamental weaknesses in our healthcare system and our social net. Those that are the least empowered are the ones suffering the most. Similarly, the outright murder of George Floyd, broadcast for all to see, has exposed racial injustice that Black community has suffered since day one in this country. We are thus calling on all tobacco control groups to not only support us in our suit against the FDA, but also join the fight for health care for all and for radical reforms of policing and the criminal justice system in this country. All of these measures, when taken together, will save Black lives. In the days and the weeks to come, the AATCLC will call in on all Black elected officials to renounce the taking of money from the tobacco industry. It's nothing but blood money, the blood of our ancestors, the blood of our mothers and fathers, and the blood of our children. All Black elected officials who have come out and have stood up for racial and social justice now need to step forward and renounce the money from the industry that is, and will continue to kill Black folks by the tens of thousands on a yearly basis. Speaking as a public health doctor, there is nothing more important that you could do at this time to save Black lives. Specifically, write and call the FDA, demand that they remove menthol from the marketplace. Write and call your city, state, and/or federal representative to have them enact flavor prohibitions. Renounce tobacco funding. Join the millions around the country calling for COVID-19 protections and major criminal justice reform. When taken together, this will go a long way toward saving Black lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gardner. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laurent Hubert with ASH, and he will moderate our question and answer session. Laurent.
Thank you very much, Carol. And it's truly an honor for Action on Smoking and Health to join the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council in this very important suit for health equity. First, a little housekeeping. Anyone can type can ask questions in the Q&A section box, which is at the bottom of your screen. And I'll start with the first question, which we just heard Dr. Gardner and stating that it was really the FDA should be ashamed of not have taken action yet. And we've really heard that from other speakers today also, that the banning of menthol tobacco products is really among the globally agreed best practices to protect health. The European Union just banned menthol tobacco products, and that came into effect last month. And in the US, there's some progress in local jurisdictions, but a lot of opposition to banning menthol banned by the tobacco industry and also by local politicians, and really leading to that very slow action on menthol ban, despite the evidence showing the impact on health in general, but also particularly on African Americans. And my question for the panelists is, do you think the response in the US would have been different towards banning menthol products if it was another population being impacted by menthol products? For example, if we were mostly dealing with white teenagers in affluent neighborhoods. Is not addressing menthol tobacco products at the federal level another example of the little value that is given to Black lives this time in this country? Would we have this conversation today if the victims were different? And for any of the panelists, but I think Dr. Gardner addressed that a little bit earlier.
I'll take the first stab at it. look at the reaction that took place a year and a half ago when it became clear that young white teenagers were using e-cigarettes. The whole country stopped, and bills were being passed left and right, and what do we do, and et cetera, et cetera. Even to make the point even sharper, the opioid crisis, when it became clear that tens of thousands of people were addicted to opioids, the majority of them being white, it became a cause, it became a celebrity thing. Black folks have been dying from the use of menthol cigarettes since they've invented menthol cigarettes. I think you know the answer, Laurent. Yes, it would be much different. Valerie, you were going to say.
Yeah, as someone who studied the tobacco industry documents, where we are today with menthol was systemically designed. It was systematically designed. All of the tobacco companies were involved in making sure that menthol cigarettes got dumped into Black communities, with the understanding that specifically our Black young men are trendsetters. So if Black young men could just get addicted to menthol cigarettes, that this would be a trend that would be seen across races and even across all age groups, but specifically across the young folks. So we're here today because this was designed specifically by tobacco industry starting as far back as the 70s that we've been able to document.
Thank you very much.
And I'd like to also weigh in on that. You know, the racial overlay in the United States is pervasive. It overlays over everything. So imagine the European Union. They have Black people in Europe. They have Africans and African Caribbean folks who are citizens, just like they have Black people in America. So imagine if the European Union or Canada said, no, we can't do this because our Black people use these products. And that when a lot of these practices, you know, the public outcry when our teenagers were hooked on these e-cigarettes was deafening. But what happened when they were coming into our communities and actually physically giving these products to our children, there were just always a lot more other things going on. So in the 60s, similar to what we're seeing right now, there was a lot of civil unrest. And when you talk about cigarettes, it seems like, you know, we have to actually wait for moments to get into the news cycle because it seems like these other things are so much more important. But what's more important than 45,000 Black people who die every year? What's more important than breaking the cycle the same way that we're trying to break it for other communities and to restrict the sale and get these products off the market?
Thank you very much for those answers. I have another kind of follow-up question. Why has it taken so long for the FDA to take action? And what do you think about those jurisdictions like in New York where menthol e-cigarettes have been banned, but not cigarettes? Is that enough?
Well, I really think that there have been some moments when the FDA seemed that they wanted to do something, but you know, and I talk about this all the time, that it's a political issue, so that there were some machinations in the White House, and Dr. Field can speak to this more eloquently than I can, where they actually redlined some of the proposed rules that the FDA, that they were trying to put out. So we need the pressure of the courts to come in and to have the FDA look at what they were mandated to do and to do it. And Phil, would you weigh in on the rules?
You make a good point, Carol. This is ultimately a political question. We know folks at the FDA and in the Center for Tobacco Products that would love to see menthol reduced. In 2016, the FDA deemed all other tobacco products under its purview, meaning in 2009, when the Family Smoking Prevention Tobacco Control Act was signed, only cigarettes and those flavors excluded were actually under the purview of the FDA. But starting in 2016, little cigars, e-cigarettes, hookahs, everything came under their purview. Part of that deeming a law that they put forward, or ordinance that they put forward, had 16 pages of references on flavored tobacco products and why it was necessary to get menthol out of these products. They sent that up the chain to the Office on Management and Budget, which was effectively, the Office on Management and Budget redlined all 16 pages that dealt with flavors and sent it back to the FDA and said that they couldn't do it. Let's be clear that the person who actually did the redlining used to work for the tobacco industry, used to work at the FDA, left the FDA, went to work with the Cigar Association of America, was rehired in 2015, and was sitting in the Office on Management and Budget when the deeming regulations came through to him. There's a great article on this in the September of 2016 New York Times that goes into detail. So yes, it's a political question. When we did the initial, and not to draw this out, but not to put too sharp a point on it, there were at least 16 known tobacco industry lawyers working in the Obama White House and in different parts of the White House. It's a thoroughly entrenched in there. This is, I want to end where Carol, this is why the court needs to step in. We've tried the political level. We've written, we held a press conference in Washington, DC, and to ask Obama to do something about this. We've written letters. We've gotten things done at Nash in Massachusetts. We've done all sorts of things, but the FDA hasn't budged.
Right. I would just like to also just sort of add on to Dr. Gardner's response that certainly there are political components to the larger issue of menthol in cigarettes, but our lawsuit is clearly a legal issue that the courts need to act on. That FDA has an obligation to protect the best interests of all Americans, including African Americans, and that there is a clear obligation under the law to do so. And so, regardless of who is in the White House, we feel that very strongly that the courts need to step in and help compel FDA to sort of act on this very important issue. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I was wondering if there are any thoughts on the banning of menthol e-cigarettes, but not combustible cigarettes, which is what we've seen in New York. I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I mean, that's the general trend that's going around the country. The menthol carve out, whether it's the form of e-cigarettes or you want to have it in chewing tobacco or whatever, I think has been eloquently already spoken to by Valerie. This is the bread and butter. Look, smoking rates have been going down for the last 15 years in the United States. At the same time, menthol smoking rates have been going up. The tobacco industry in the United States is a $220 billion industry. That was as of 2016, 2017. If menthol is 35% of that, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars. This is what this fight is about. It's an economic, political, and as Chris has just pointed out, a legal fight. I see we have some questions in the Q&A.
Yep, they're coming from different areas. So one is about what is the best case scenario outcome of this suit? What are we trying to accomplish? What would be the best outcome of this lawsuit?
The best outcome would be for the FDA to act and to take these products off of the market. That would be the best outcome. But in the interim, we are encouraging the cities and the states that have ordinances before them to take these products offline to do so, not to wait, because we've been waiting a long time. So we press ahead down different avenues. So we would like the FDA to protect us the way that they protect everyone else. And I use the analogy, when we pass a seatbelt law, we don't say, oh, we're not, Black people aren't used to wearing a seatbelt, so if they feel like they want to wear a seatbelt, they can. We come to a conclusion as a society that it's in the best interest for everyone to wear a seatbelt, and that becomes the law of the land. And so when you take some products off and leave other products on, that's not helping us, that's not protecting us. And we also want our institutions to help us. Black people can stop smoking just like other people can. Maybe we need a little more help. The world is witnessing the tremendous stress that we live under in this country. And so we want some extra help to get these products out of our communities and to look at this in a global, comprehensive way. This is one thing of many, but it's one of the most important things. and that African Americans spend about $5 billion every year with the tobacco industry. And what we're purchasing for that, with that money, is death. And that could be much better spent building up our communities and building up to have prosperous and healthy and happy communities. And that's what we're all working for. This is a moment like no other. And so we need to jump on this the way that we need to jump on the other issues that are facing us in this country.
Any other panelists would like to add to this question about the best possible outcome? No?
I'd like to hear from our attorney.
Yes, Christopher Lynn, would you like to comment?
Sure, I would just reiterate what Carol had said. The best case scenario for this lawsuit is that we are able to structurally basically get menthol cigarettes out of the marketplace, to get FDA to use the best science and recognize that, in fact, something does need to be done. The inaction at the agency level has just been gone on for way too long, and too many people have been hurt and have passed away as a result of that inaction. Certainly, we would like to have that action by the agency happen as soon as possible. And so we are hoping to get an order from the court relatively quickly, so to speak, so that we can quickly address these critical public health issues.
Laurent, one other thing I would just add, I know the glass is half full. I would just add that hopefully if press are watching this, or when we send out a media alert and e-blast about this, that this gets publicized around the country, that this suit is going on. And hopefully this will move some people into action, both at the local, the state, and the federal level. So that would be a great outcome for this press conference.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a question that came, a very specific one, and it was about the Morehouse reference about the political and social determinants of health, which Carol, I believe you addressed early on in your speech. Could you repeat that reference?
Sure. It's a book that was published through Johns Hopkins Press, and it's Daniel Dawes. He is a professor with Morehouse School of Medicine in their Satcher Leadership Institute. And the book really is another way of looking at these issues, and that we must deal with the political determinants as well as the social determinants. So the
what's the title?
It's called Political Determinants of Health. Daniel Dawes, D-A-W-E-S.
Another question that came up is what was the role of the industry in influencing this, the opposition to the phasing out and the banning of menthol products? In some cases, was the industry trying to even influence or even work with front groups within the African American community? Is that something that you've seen happen?
Yes, it is. But I wanted, while we're talking about structure, the way that the FDA is set up, their tobacco industry actually sits on some of the committees that are advising the FDA about what to do about the industry, because that's the structure of how it's set up with the FDA. So they have a non-voting seat at the table, but they're there to hear everything that's happening. They're there to lawsuits. They had lawsuits in the beginning. So they're constantly there to obfuscate everything. Meanwhile, the people who represent the community are locked out, and we have to get our information, when it comes through the channels. We're not a part of the conversation of how these issues are going to be resolved. So that's one thing that the industry does. They're always there. And then, of course, they have historically tried to manipulate our African-American leadership groups and organizations. And I'm going to pass it to Dr. Val or Dr. Phil, who have done research on that issue.
Yeah, I can address that. Well, we knew before the FDA took this issue up that there were pervasive relationships between a number of our so-called leadership groups and tobacco industry executives and managers and folks with influence, even within the industry. So when we were dealing with the issue of menthol in the FDA, we were not surprised to see the opposition coming from organizations that we had already identified as having relationships with the tobacco industry. These organizations being CORE, NOBO, and there was the Black Chambers of Commerce. Those were the ones who went on public record arguing against the ban of menthol cigarettes. And it's always with the industry's rhetoric as the forefront of their argument. And even at the beginning of 2009, when we were looking at this issue with menthol, we were hearing from these organizations, which had NOBO as a national organization for Black law enforcement. There was always a connection being made between criminalization and the banning of menthol cigarettes. So instead of putting the focus on how menthol cigarettes are disproportionately targeted to Black communities, instead of focusing on the number of Blacks who die every year from menthol cigarettes, instead of talking about how the quality of lives have gone from basic helping to maintain the structure of our communities to family members who could no longer care for their family members. Instead of talking about what was really happening, they would make reference to things that there was no evidence. There were no signs that African Americans were being disproportionately targeted by the by the law enforcement because they were smoking menthol cigarettes. And this is something that a trend that we have been seeing even in the work that we're doing at the local level. So we're always trying to counter the industry arguments with the facts. And one of the things that we have seen is that as we provide the evidence and we talk about the facts, that those who were confused because they were hearing industry rhetoric through the voices of people who look like us from our community, who very often have known faces and known names that we recognize, we understand when we get the facts that it was all the industry rhetoric and arguments that are interfering with our efforts to do good public health policies that will benefit our community specifically.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yerger. And Philip, Dr. Gardiner mentioned a call to action to some extent, and really for everyone to support this. Can you expand on the call to action? And we have a number of listeners from media, public health organizations, as well as some UN agencies on this webinar, as well as the people listening through live through YouTube. So what can be done to support this lawsuit for researchers, medical practitioners, student community members, and the media?
Well, as I said in my remarks, I think we did this once before. We were going to ask people to do it again, is to actually write and call the FDA and demand that they remove menthol from the marketplace. I think that needs to be an ongoing thing that we do. It could also take the form of the Pollock bill is sitting in the Senate, having passed the House of Representatives. The Pollock bill, of course, would restrict the manufacture and sale of flavored tobacco products, including menthol. If we could even get a senator to, it's not even going to come to the floor in the way it is now, but you could write your senators to have them be aware that the Pollock bill is there. And if people are really in favor of saving Black lives, and everybody seems to be talking about it now, and it's about time that they are, then this is something they can do. What's really going on, and Carol mentioned this, and I really want to say this to the people that are on this webinar or press conference, things are going to happen at the local level sooner, and we can't wait on the FDA. There are proposed flavor restrictions and menthol prohibitions going on throughout the country. To the degree that you can get involved at your local level with your community representatives, with your local elected officials, and push this stuff forward, this could be the great thing. Look at it this way: if we improve COVID-19 protections and we deal with major criminal justice reform, and we get menthol out of the marketplace, then we really will go a long way towards saving Black lives.
And if I might just add, because obviously we know how important it is to do tobacco control at the local level. And since the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council has been in the forefront, wherever we go, we are able to show why menthol needs to be included in those policy decisions. But at the local level, jurisdictions can only restrict or prohibit the sales. The FDA can actually take menthol as an additive out of these products. And that's one of the reasons why we're focused on the FDA as well.
And we'd also like to encourage municipalities to approach this as a public health policy. It's not a criminal policy.
Right.
So in many of the ordinances that we passed, Tobacco 21, increasing the age to purchase, there's no criminal penalty for someone to have possession of it or to use it. We are about interrupting the supply side of this at this point, and then educating and engaging the community with public health to work on the demand side. So it's not about criminalizing anyone. Criminalization and addiction do not work. Dr. Phil talked about that when opioids came out, we had a public health approach to that. And nicotine addiction also deserves a public health approach. So as we're enacting legislation and ordinances, there should never be any criminalization of an addicted smoker.
Yes, a very important point.
Or youth who's experimenting.
Exactly, absolutely. And I just want to point out, because we have a number of media people on the call, that the link to the suit, it's actually to the complaint, you can find it in the chat box, and also that all of the panelists will be available for interviews with media after this press conference. So the last question that I have here, and then I will pass it over to you again, Carol, and it links a little bit to what you just mentioned about we do not want to criminalize youth who are experimenting or using it. But what are the concerns around when the product is banned, if 9 out of 10 African Americans who smoke currently use menthol products, about the underground black market, illegal market of menthol cigarettes? And I think you addressed it already to some extent, but if you wanted to address that question.
Well, let me just say this. Menthol cigarettes and all flavored products are banned in over 60 cities around the country. No black market has arisen. In Ontario, Canada, which actually looked into this since they've had their in place for 2 years, that the actual rates of smoking have gone down. And we actually do have some literature. Blacks were interviewed earlier in this decade, asking them if menthol cigarettes were banned, would they stop? And a large percentage of them did. And just from personal experience, I used to be a menthol smoker. And when the alternative was smoke something else or not smoke a menthol, I wasn't going to smoke anything else. And I've been quit for over 30 years. Having said that, I want to say something that we need to say. As these laws are being passed, not only should they not criminalize youth, there needs to be money set aside for cessation services for people that are trying to quit. That should be part of the ordinances that are passed. Let me just leave it there.
And that our organization, we are involved in police reform. We've seen, we've been doing this a long time. I have photos of the latest black man or black boy who's been killed by either the police or a vigilante group, and that the tobacco industry should not be allowed to latch on to the legitimate concerns of our community so that they can keep killing us and putting these products in our communities and addicting our children another generation. So we've seen that, there are people who say, well, taking these products off. Eric Gardner is the poster man for that, the way that he was horrifically murdered in Staten Island. And my position then, as it is now, was it had nothing really to do with what he was doing, as we saw with Floyd and all these other people that we've seen in live being murdered on indirect on live. So we have to deal with police reform. So saying that we're going to leave these products on the market is like telling our Black boys to, put your hands on the wheel when the police officer talks to you, because that's not the issue. The issue is about true police reform, and we're all for that. We are working for that as well. We are activists from our community. We have all been touched personally by losing people to tobacco, but we've also been touched by all the other things that happen to Black people in this country. So we're not doing this in a vacuum. We fully understand what we're doing, and we need people to understand that this is one of the biggest drivers of death and morbidity in our communities, the resources that are lost in terms of human and financial, and it needs to stop. So we need, on both ends, we need to be working to get these products out of our communities.
And if I might say, I think we need to be sort of aware of the possibility that we might be seeing these acute issues pitted up against our tobacco control efforts, because now we understand just in the last week that Altria has been dumping money into Black organizations. They're doing that for a reason. We have enough research to understand that they don't give money because they care for our community. They give money because they want something. And these organizations may or may not be aware up front what is expected, but they're going to have to pay a cost for accepting money from the industry. And right now it's to cause and to maintain confusion within our community and to pit the acute issues up against those long-term, more devastating issues such as tobacco in our communities.
Yes.
On the black market point, could I say something really fast? I wanted to point out that the EU is going to be an interesting case study for this, because if the FDA were to take action, it would be the entire country, whereas now we have piecemeal restrictions on menthol. So the black market can more easily flourish when they can cross state lines or things like that. So an entire countrywide ban on menthol, we'll have more information out of the EU shortly, but I do think it would help with the black market problem, not make it worse.
I would just also add that the idea of a potential black market is perhaps it's a storyline that's been perpetrated by the big tobacco, and that as part of the Tobacco Control Act, FDA was mandated to come up with some track and trace regulations to sort of address such a potential black market. That sort of concern about trying to get track and trace regulations set up was included as part of AATCLC's citizen petition, along with several other leading organizations. And so this has been an issue that FDA has been well aware of, should have been studying for years, and should be able to solve at some point. And so we think that there's definitely a role for FDA to play in this, and that they need to step up and help take care of this problem.
Absolutely. And Chris, could you also, just one clarification that people are asking is whether in this complaint, both flavored menthol e-cigarettes as well as cigarettes are included in this complaint?
This complaint only deals with menthol cigarettes. Menthol cigarettes are an incredibly huge killer of many people, including so many people within the African American community. And so it was our decision to address the most harmful product first.
Thank you for that clarification, which some people were asking. So I'm going to, again, I want to remind everyone that the complaint is on the chat box, and the panelists are available for interviews after the press conference. And I will pass it over to our moderator, Carol Mcgruder. Carol, back to you.
All righty, so we're going to wrap this up, and I just really want to give my heartfelt thanks to all of our participants on the press conference today and the partners. We've had many supporters over these long years that we've been sloshing along, and there are too many to name, but you know who you are, and we really appreciate the support that we've gotten from many of our public health policy colleagues. So thank you all. And as Laurent said, we will be standing by. We're available immediately after this press conference for individual virtual interviews, and then we will be available as we go. So this is, we're celebrating Juneteenth on Friday, and we want to be free from all of these things, especially the things that are so damaging and detrimental to our communities.